Hi, this is Dan Smith of DPS Legal Counsel, and welcome to today's episode of Legal Scrubs. Today I want to talk about contracts between a medical practice and their employed physicians. And in particular, I want to talk about a situation in which a medical practice needs to put something in their contracts to protect them in the event or when an employed physician leaves the practice. And what I'm thinking of in particular is this. Let's say that you have an employed physician or several employed physicians in your group practice, and you have a provision that says that when they leave, they need to return any and all confidential information to the practice and not take it with them. And they also need to provide the practice with tail insurance coverage that would protect the practice for the period of time in which the practice has employed that physician and probably was paying for their malpractice insurance during that period. But when that physician leaves, and if you have a claims-made policy, which most policies are going to be with a medical practice, if the claim is made after the physician leaves, unless you have tail insurance coverage for that physician, you're not going to have insurance coverage for any acts or omissions that physician may have had. And so it's typical to have in your employment agreement that when an employed physician leaves the practice, they provide the practice with tail insurance coverage. And so how do you enforce that obligation? How do you enforce the obligation for them to return any confidential information that they might have gathered during the time that they were employed? Well, I'm thinking that if you think in terms of other types of contracts outside the medical world, in which there are obligations that arise upon the termination of a contract, one thing that comes to mind fairly quickly is a lease in which there is a security deposit. And so it's typical when a tenant starts a lease agreement with a landlord that they put up a month's rent or 2 months' rent at the beginning. And that money is set aside and held as a security deposit so that when the tenant leaves, if there's damage to the premises, or they haven't paid their rent or some other things, then the landlord can use that security deposit to offset the obligations that the tenant had to it. Well, in the same way, one little hack that you can do in a contract with your employed physicians is to provide some provision in your agreement that's sort of like a security deposit. Now, I'm not suggesting that when you hire an employed physician that you have them put money up like a security deposit. That probably would not work. What I'm saying is that in order to have some fund of dollars, some fund set aside that you can look at in the event that they leave and there are some financial obligations or other obligations, if performance they need to make after they leave, you need some money set aside to cover that. And so one way to do that is to provide that the last month's compensation for that employee would be held until they provide all the post-contract obligations, post-employment obligations they have, such as returning all copies of confidential information and providing the practice with a tail insurance policy. Now, one potential problem with doing it that way is that you might have a physician that just up and leaves without any warning. And so what do you do in that event? Okay, so what do you do to protect against a physician who leaves at a drop of a hat and doesn't tell you that they're leaving and just leaves midstream, and you haven't had the chance to withhold their last paycheck to cover possible expenses they might owe you at the end of the employment relationship? Well, one way you could do this is to build into your agreement with the doctor some provision for, let's say that you've determined that post-employment obligations would cost around $5,000. So that would be the cost you think thereabouts or close to a tail policy for that doctor. Or maybe it's a little less, but you want to have a little a cushion, and also to encourage them to return all the confidential information to the practice. Well, you could say, if you said it was $5,000 or thereabouts, you could build into your contract with the doctor a withholding of $1,000 a month in their pay for the first 5 months. Set that $5,000 aside in an account, sort of like a security deposit account for that doctor, that they get at the end of their employment upon fulfilling all their obligations to the practice, such as providing the tail coverage and returning all the confidential information. That might be another way of going about it, rather than waiting till the end and just holding their last paycheck until they do these things. Just setting aside dollars up front, maybe a little bit per month for several months, to create a fund that can then be held for that doctor, and they will get that money at some point upon their fulfilling their contract obligations. That's just one simple way that you can kind of build into your employment contract with your physician some protection for you to make sure that when they do leave the practice, they do what they're supposed to under the contract. Okay, I hope that helps. That's today's episode of Legal Scrubs. We'll see you next time.